Hello viewer. For those of you that have been watching Eric the Car Guy for a while, you know that I try to avoid making videos about AC work. I avoid this for a number of reasons, mainly because AC involves more than you suspect. I mean, you think you know something about AC, but no. AC involves several different disciplines. One, you have to know how the system works and the pressure-temperature differential. Also, there's some electrical things that could be involved, there's some mechanical things that could be involved, so there's a lot of different disciplines that come into play. However, here we are with my Subaru and the air doesn't work. And honestly, I'd rather my wife be driving this than driving my car, and the only way she's going to do that in the summer is if the air works. So, here we are. The first thing I did was I just checked to see if there was any pressure at all in the system. And there was not. There was zip, there was zero. And this is not a good sign. Mainly because one of the things that happens in that instance is you get moisture in the system, especially if it's been like that for a long time. And moisture in an AC system, wicked bad. In fact, they have a receiver dryer or a dryer assembly someplace in the system to absorb that moisture, but it gets saturated awfully quickly. It's not meant to take large amounts of moisture. So should you find yourself in a situation where you've got a completely flat AC system, and it has been that way for a while, you really should replace the receiver dryer assembly or the dryer assembly. If not, there could be problems that arise from that. But I'm going to walk you through the steps of one, finding a leak, and I've already found a leak on this system. It's pretty substantial. All I had to do was hook my gauges up. That's how bad it is. And I'm going to try something else, which I probably shouldn't show you, but you know what? If it works, it works. And that is, I'm going to attempt to repair the leak and then go from there. So all kinds of exciting, fun things for you in this episode of Eric the Car Guy. All right, like I said, you've got a high pressure side, look, big H, and a low pressure side to AC. And you can take either one of these caps off. This system is a 134A system. Anything older than, like, say, 96 has an R12 system, but that should really be converted because R12 is not sold anymore, and if you can find it, is prohibitively expensive. And most conversion kits involve changing these fittings here, which are very different than the R12 fittings. But one of the things that I like to try is I'll just push down on that Schrader valve briefly to see if there's any pressure in the system. And since I don't have fingers shaped like chopsticks, I'm just going to use this screwdriver blade. And just briefly do this and keep your face away from here. In fact, we should probably be wearing safety glasses from here on out, which is what I will do. But just push down on it briefly. It's the same thing as a tire valve. You can see on this one, I'm pushing down and there's absolutely nothing coming out. But if you get like a little squirt, it means there's some pressure in the system, which is a very good sign. Okay, in the interest of teaching you good practices, we're going to wear these from here on out. Since we know the system is completely empty, one of the things that you can do to try to figure out if the system can hold pressure is you can put a vacuum on it. For that, you need to purchase a vacuum pump. Now, there are two fittings on a manifold gauge set, which is what you're going to need in order to do any kind of AC work. I picked up this set at Harbor Freight that was rather inexpensive. There are two different sizes. The high side is the fat one, the big one, and then you run down the valve there. The low side is the smaller one, or blue one. I guess that valve was already run down. And my leak has already manifested. All I had to do was hook this stuff up. See that dripping out? There it is, right underneath my low pressure inlet. There is a pretty sizable leak in this tube. In fact, there's a little puncture wound right about here. So normally I would have put a vacuum on the system to see if it would hold vacuum. If it did not hold vacuum, then I would know that the system is compromised in some way. You could add a C dye. There's a few different ways you can go about trying to find where the leaks are, but that's the number one thing you deal with AC is leaks. So we know that there's a leak in this low pressure line. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove said line and see if I can repair it. To remove this line is fairly simple. Right here on the inlet of the compressor, there's a fastener there. There's a couple of clamps that hold it up underneath. This is where it goes. It travels back from here all the way over to, this is the evaporator inlet on this side, and it just goes through here. So there's a bracket here, and I believe there's another bracket up underneath this intake assembly. case you're wondering what that receiver dryer thing looks like, it's right here. I got 2 wrenches. I got one that's a 24 and one that's a 27. Now all I need to do is this 12 at the compressor. Now I just fish the line out of here. Now you want to be careful not to get any dirt or moisture in the system. So be aware. Now over at the bench here, we can get a look at the cause of our problem, which is right here. This was caused by somebody. There's a hole, that's the hole, and there's the gouge along the side. Well, okay then, this is what we have. I went back and just added just a little bit more to the solder here. If I'm honest, I don't think this is going to hold, but I have really nothing to lose at this point. So if it works great. Here's some oil that's good for 134 systems. Oil for R12 is different than oil for 134. Just gonna lube that real quick. And last but not least, I have this other O-ring here that I'm just gonna take my finger. It's a good idea to replace these O-rings. I have my doubts on whether or not this will even work. So I just lubricated the O-ring a bit, and I'm gonna go over and install it on the vehicle. The installation is pretty much gonna be the reverse of removal. Try to fish this down through here. This is an O-ring. It seals, and these wrenches are long, so just once you get it on there, just another like quarter turn or so and you're done. Don't run it down so tight you strip it out. Okay, I'm first gonna hook my gauges back up. There we go. Both valves are closed. Now we need something called a vacuum pump. This is a vacuum pump. This one wasn't that expensive. I got it at Harbor Freight. And you basically have 2 ports that you can hook up to on the top. This is the one that fits my gauge set. And it runs on good old 110. Or it could run on something else depending upon what country you buy it in, come to think of it. Then you have the 3rd hose that's on your gauge set, yellow one. That one I'm going to hook to here. Then I am going to plug it in. It's going to begin to suck. All right, now that I've got that on, I'm going to open up my gauges. And I'm just going to leave both sides open, and I'm going to leave it sit on here for a half hour or so. You can see how the needle is burying down. That's exactly what I want it to do because it's putting a vacuum on the system. What this does is it makes it so any moisture that's in the system will boil away. Water boils because of the pressure that's on the outside of it. So you take away that pressure and it'll boil away. That's the idea behind this. So the reason we're putting a vacuum on the system is to eliminate moisture, but also it's a way for checking for leaks without having to pressurize the system or put refrigerant into it. So it's a safe way to check to see if your system has any leaks or not. So I'm just going to let that vacuum pump run on here for, I'm going to say about 20-30 minutes, and I'm going to come back, close the valves, and let it sit and see if it holds vacuum. You might actually be able to see this, but that's the moisture boiling away. Just like you'd see a pot of boiling water. That's what that is. Okay, it's been about 25 minutes. I'm going to close my gauges. Turn off my pump and let it sit. All right, now you can actually see that this one right here is dropping fairly rapidly. That probably means that there's a leak somewhere in the system. Knowing that I need to put a receiver dryer on this anyway, I just wanted to see if I could hold pressure. It's quite possible my repair is junk. So I'll probably get that low pressure line in addition to a receiver dryer, and then I'm going to go through the same process again. So I still have a leak somewhere, and eventually I'm going to have to find out where that leak is. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to use refrigerant dye. This is something that's commonly done to find leaks. I'm going to go through the process of what you do whenever you're putting this into the system, and then I'm going to recharge it just enough to get the system to work and to get this dye circulated throughout. That way, even after I replace the hose, if there are other leaks in the system, I should be able to find them. Then I've got the dye in the system. Okay, so here are the materials that I have. I've got my manifold gauge set. I've got a high and a low pressure hookup, but the center one is the one that I hooked up to my vacuum. It's also what you use to charge things up with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of this AC dye and I'm going to put it in this hose here before I hook it up to my refrigerant. This is like commercially available stuff that you can find. You're going to need, a lot of times it will come with like a little gauge attachment so that you can attach it to the top of the container itself. Before we do that, I'm going to take a little bit of this dye and put it inside this hose. Best way to do this, I think, is just to unscrew the hose here, because you'll note there's no Schrader valve in there. The other end has a valve assembly, so you're not able to pour it directly in there, but you are able to pour it into here. And now I'm just going to add just a little bit of dye to the inside of this hose. Going to let it seep down in there. And that should be plenty. You don't really need a whole lot. And then I'm going to screw this back onto my gauge assembly. And you probably want to wear gloves when you do this, because you'll notice on my hands already, this is dye. It will stain you. Okay, your refrigerant, they come in smaller cans too. And then this one came with this attachment that screws onto the top here. And I should have said this to start with. There's like a little thing that punctures the top of that can in here. So you want to turn it all the way out before you try to screw it down onto the refrigerant container. And there we go. Now I'm forgetting something very crucial here, which I'm going to go get right now. You know that movie where they say you'll shoot your eye out? Well, with AC work, it's possible you can freeze your eye out. Not cool. So whenever you're working with AC stuff, just put your safety glasses on. Before there was no pressure in the system, but right here, this is my pressure. So I have to respect this. Now, take your third hose and put it onto the end here. Make sure both valves are closed, so turn them all the way clockwise. Now you run down the puncture. This will puncture the can. Sort of felt it there. Now it's all the way down. Now I'm going to start opening it back up. This is the weird part about this. Now I'm going to start opening it back up. And now refrigerant can exit and go into the manifold gauge set. So run it all the way down and then run it back out. Just heard it fill up this hose. And we've already got a dye into the hose. I probably could have put a little more in, but yeah. Check for leaks now, because you don't want any leaks here, because you don't want to suck any air into the system. Now I'm going to start the car and turn the AC on. I'm going to put the AC on vent, turn the fan on here, turn the AC button on. Okay, the engine's now on. You can see the AC compressor's not working. I've got my refrigerant ready to go. And I'm going to feed it into the low side. Don't feed it into the high side, feed it into the low side, but do it slowly. But for me, since I know there's a leak, as soon as I see the compressor kick on, I'm gonna shut it off and just let it run. But all you gotta do is now is open up the low pressure side. And it's adding refrigerant and dye. Should be. There it goes, just kicked on. So now I'm just turning that off. Just enough to get it circulated through the system. This way I know the dye will get through the AC system. Both cooling fans are coming on. And keep in mind, I'm only doing this to try to circulate refrigerant through the system. So now what I'll do is I'll close off my refrigerant here, run this pin all the way down again, and I'll go back up here to my gauge and I'll open this up again, and what this will do is this will suck out any of the remaining refrigerant that's in this line. The low pressure side of the system should draw it in. Now I'll disconnect my gauges. I'm going to reinstall my caps. So while I was editing the video, I realized I never showed you the dye in action. But if you just take, like, even, this is my old, like, 1970s black light, a UV light, and put it on this dye, it tells you exactly where the leaks are. It's really easy to find them. So this is what the UV dye does when you put it in the system, and it's very good at helping you find leaks like this. And they make handheld versions of these lights, but you know, you can use stuff that's laying around, but I mean, any place this dye goes, it's going to show up very, very clearly. In fact, if you look down inside the system, you can see that it pretty much permeates everything and goes throughout. So UV dye is a great way to find AC leaks. Another method besides using dye to find leaks is one of these fancy leak detector things. What this does is basically you go around underneath, you go on the underside because Freon's heavier than air, all the parts of the AC system listening for this thing to change. And since we have a known leak, I can show you real quick how this works. But a word of caution, like when the fans are running, it can blow stuff around underneath the engine compartment, and this is not always as accurate as the dye. I've used both methods and got pretty good with it. I like to use this to check for evaporator leaks. As far as all the stuff under the hood, where all the lines and fittings and stuff meets, this is an okay way of finding it, but personally I prefer using dye because it shows you exactly where the leak is. Turn the car off for this. So you can see it starts out with like one line, but then once you find a leak, it'll react. But see how it didn't find it when the engine was running, but it finds it now. Like I said, if I'm looking for leaks with the evaporator, I often use the sniffer tool to find those leaks, since it's up inside the dash and you can't necessarily see the dye. What you might be able to see is if you look at the evap tube, if there's dye around the outside of that, that's usually a good indication that something is leaking inside there. It may not be the evaporator, it may be like an expansion valve or something, but you really won't know if it's inside the dash until you get inside the dash exactly what is leaking, so be prepared for the worst. But this is what I do. I turn the air on low, I turn the AC on, and I put it on vent. Then I get my sniffer and just turn it on and sniff around the area of the vents for any refrigerant. And it's funny that I'm getting a little bit of one, because, and you'll find it actually more if you hold it like up above the vents sometimes. You don't want to put the fan on high because it'll, once again, that messes this thing up. but I am getting like little traces of something here. I'm looking for like a lot of noise, more like that or worse. But that's how I check evaporators with the sniffer. Okay, here's something I want to point out is like, let's call it an area of interest. When you're looking for leaks, look in this area just behind the AC compressor clutch / pulley assembly, because sometimes the front compressor shaft seal might leak, and if it does, it will show up in this area. Well, we know my repair didn't work. For sure now. Definitely see some leaks there and put it, like I said, a small amount of refrigerant in there. You really don't want the refrigerant to get out into the atmosphere. I consider that just irresponsible. But there are times when you just can't do it any other way, because the leak detector needs to find refrigerant, dye needs to be in the system to go through it. The thing that I want you to avoid is just venting an entire AC system into the atmosphere. That is just not cool. So if you do find yourself in a situation where you need to perform some AC repair and you know there's refrigerant still in the system itself, take it somewhere and have them evacuate that system. I mean, you don't have to have them do the repair. They can just hook up a machine that will take out all the refrigerant that's in the system and safely recover it, and possibly recycle it, and then you can do your repairs and then you can recharge the system. But I ordered this new part online. Like I said, it didn't work. I don't know what I'm gonna have to go through to find the right part. It's not exactly easy to find a suction hose for a 97 Subaru, but I'll do what I can. And I'll be back, and hopefully next time we'll fix it. But I'm glad I did not put that receiver dryer on there, because like I said, if what I did didn't fix it, then I wanna know that now. I don't want to put my receiver dryer on it, possibly contaminate it with a bunch of moisture. We'll be back when we get a new hose. All right, back again for attempt number 3 on this hose. I'm going to check and make sure, for starters, that the inlet to the compressor, that connection is good. And once again, try to install this hose. And then we're gonna vacuum the system down and check for leaks. And then if there aren't any leaks, I'm gonna go back and install the receiver dryer, go back and check for leaks again, and then recharge the system. So, through the magic of editing, I'm gonna pop this thing on the car. So now I'm gonna hook my gauges up, run a vacuum on it, and see if the system holds vacuum. All right, I've been running a vacuum on this for about 20 minutes. So the next step that I'm gonna take is I'm gonna close off the valves on the gauges, turn off the vacuum pump, and let it sit for like another 20 minutes and see if the pressure drops or the vacuum goes away. Well, this is an encouraging sign, because it's been about 20 minutes and it doesn't look like the vacuum has changed at all. So there's still vacuum on the system. However, as part of my plan, I didn't want to replace the receiver dryer until I was absolutely certain that there were no leaks in the system. But now that I'm fairly certain that there aren't any leaks in the system, I'm going to now replace the receiver dryer and then pretty much go through this process all over again. But this time, instead of waiting so long after I vacuum the system down, I'm going to start charging it up. And I'm first going to start by disconnecting the electrical connection. And then it's just a question of these two 10 millimeters here, and then down underneath here is another 10 that is a bracket that sort of pinches it and holds it in place. All right, before I install this, there's some things I need to switch over. This is the old one, obviously, and the new one, which I'm grateful came with some new O-rings. But we're gonna have to switch over the pressure switch from the old unit to the new. And if we line things up, we're also gonna have to remove this plug here. This is where the line's attached, so we're gonna need to remove this plug up here and install our pressure switch there. And you know what? There's a new O-ring here. So I'm actually going to use this O-ring instead of the old one since it's new. I'm still going to add just a little bit of refrigerant oil going to remove the old O-ring. You don't want a double O-ring, it won't seal. That's close with the sight glass. I think we'll be okay though. Now you don't need to crank things down on AC parts so tight you break them. Just make it snug. This is a very long wrench, so you don't need to twist it too much and you're exerting a lot of force. Now let's swap the O-rings on the lines and get this on the vehicle and get it vacuuming down again. I'm just going to take my pocket screwdriver and peel off the old O-rings. I'm also going to compare them to the new O-rings to make sure they are of similar size and thickness. And I'm going to be honest, the new O-ring looks a little bit smaller than the old one. I actually think I'm going to go with the old O-rings. They're still very pliable. They're not damaged in any way. So I'm going to just reuse the old ones and lube them up. Now we're ready to install our new part. It's just going to slide right in. It's got a couple of stickers that seal off the top. I'm going to peel those off now. That's that. And this is where I'm going to choose to end this video. I'm just going to focus on the repair and the detection of leaks in this video. I'm going to make another separate video altogether about evacuating the system and recharging it. We touched on it a little bit in this video, but I feel that not everybody's going to benefit from the information from this one, but a lot more people will benefit from the information from, like, say, a video just strictly on evacuation and recharging. So I'm going to end this one here. I hope this information was useful to you, especially if you have one of these vehicles. Number one thing that I want to impart, a little bit of oil on the O-rings before you insert things. Don't tighten things so tightly that you either deform the O-rings and actually cause a leak. Also, if the system has been open for any length of time, it's been some time since the AC system functioned and you know there was a leak as large as there was in this one, there's going to be moisture in the system. So you have to replace that receiver dryer, or in some cases it's going to be called an accumulator. It just depends on where it's located. Its function is exactly the same on either system, and it's there to remove the moisture in the system. And that's why we're going to evacuate everything out, all the air out of here, because that's going to allow that moisture in that water to boil away in essence. If we lower the atmosphere that the water is in, it's going to have more of a tendency to boil. And that's pretty much what it does, is it just quite literally boils off the water that's in the system. So you want to get as much moisture out as possible. You want to make sure that you found all the leaks. Verify that you've made the repair by leaving it on a vacuum for a significant amount of time so I can be reasonably certain that I don't have any leaks. I hope that this information is going to be of use to you. I am Eric the Car Guy. You can always find me at EricTheCarGuy.com, Facebook, Twitter, Google+. I welcome your comments. Be safe, have fun, stay dirty. See you next time for the recharge. Back in a bit.